What if I told you that one of the richest men in the world decided to disguise himself as a janitor just to discover who truly respected him? Jonathan Reed, a billionaire surrounded by luxury and flatterers, traded his suit for a worn-out uniform, his commanding presence for the invisible gaze of a simple worker. No one knew who he really was. The result? Cruel jokes, contempt, and revelations strong enough to shake any empire. But what no one expected was that, in this game of masks, Jonathan would find something far greater than money, the truth about the people around him, and even true love. Want to know how one strategic lie revealed who was loyal and who was only pretending? Then subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this story will surprise you from beginning to end. Jonathan Reed was the portrait of success, a black billionaire, owner of a conglomerate that stretched across multiple sectors of the economy. Yet behind the glow of his fortune, there was a growing restlessness. He realized he was surrounded by flatterers and people who approached him only out of self-interest. The question that consumed him was simple, yet profound. Did anyone truly respect him for who he was, and not for what he had? As the years went by, Jonathan noticed recurring patterns. Whenever he achieved something new friends suddenly appeared, always ready to praise and exalt his choices. But by observing closely, he could see it all sounded rehearsed, mechanical, lacking authenticity. What should have been a source of pride became a source of suspicion. He began to realize that much of his social life was built on appearances. The man who had grown accustomed to applause no longer found joy in it. The smiles he received from executives, the exaggerated bows in the hallways, the speeches of admiration at events, everything seemed to come with a hidden price. Jonathan wondered, would those same people remain by his side if his fortune vanished overnight? The unease grew, as if every gesture were a mask about to fall. Memories of his youth came back in contrast. In times when he had nothing, his life was simple, but the few friends who stood by him were genuine. They didn't depend on his bank account to stay, and that made all the difference. Comparing that modest past with his luxurious present only deepened his sense of emptiness. After all, what good was it to conquer the world if he could not trust those walking beside him? Jonathan understood that power brought obedience, but obedience was not the same as respect. He knew that many followed him out of fear of consequences, not out of genuine admiration. This led him to reflect on the difference between authority and true influence. Authority imposed can last for years, but authentic respect is only born when there is real connection between people. And in his empire, that connection seemed increasingly scarce. He had become a prisoner of his own image. The luxury car, the dazzling penthouse, the sophisticated parties, everything was on display, as if his life were a permanent spectacle. But behind the scenes, loneliness was his most faithful companion. Behind all the glitter, there lingered a painful question. Who would see Jonathan Reed without the title of billionaire? That doubt hurt more than any material loss. Conversations with his executives only reinforced his perception. They were always ready to agree, rarely to question, always eager to flatter, rarely to show sincerity. Jonathan realized there was no room for vulnerability. Any sign of weakness could be turned against him. And so the most powerful man in the room was, at the same time, the most isolated. The weight of his position became a burden. The higher he climbed, the further he felt from others. It was as if he had built a golden wall around himself, but that wall kept him from knowing who truly stood on the other side for him. The doubt was no longer just an annoyance. It had become a call to action, a sign that he needed to uncover the truth no matter the cost. At this point in his journey, Jonathan fully acknowledged his situation. It was no longer enough to suspect or to analyze cold gestures. He needed concrete proof, something that would reveal what the masks tried to hide. And with that decision in mind, an audacious plan began to take shape, one that would forever change the course of his life and his company. Jonathan Reed knew that simply observing would not be enough. He had to go further, break free from the bubble of luxury that isolated him, and draw closer to the reality of his own employees. The decision to create a disguise was born from this. impulse, to see the world without the filters of power and wealth. It was the only way to discover who stood by him out of convenience and who truly possessed character. The billionaire conceived the idea as one might plan a war strategy. It could not be just any disguise. It had to be convincing down to the smallest details. A common name, simple clothing, accessories that erased every trace of sophistication. Thus, Samuel Price was born, an anonymous janitor, invisible to most eyes but more observant than ever. The mask was ready. Now all that remained was the courage to wear it. The worn-out uniform carried the look of someone who had lived through hard days. Old glasses, an unkempt fake beard, and a slightly hunched posture completed the transformation. No one could imagine that behind that humble figure was the man who ran a billion-dollar empire. It was a calculated irony. To see who truly respected him, he first had to stop being seen. With the new disguise, Jonathan changed not only his appearance but also his identity. He learned to walk more slowly, to speak with hesitation, to avoid the commanding gestures that would betray him as someone used to giving orders. This exercise in humility was, in itself, a psychological dive. Discovering how others reacted was important, but discovering how he himself reacted also became part of the experience. It was curious to realize how a simple change of clothing could completely alter the way someone was treated. In Jonathan's mind, a sharp contrast appeared. Before, every gesture of his was exalted. Now he would be measured only by the practical utility of cleaning the floor. This duality revealed how much image shaped perception. And more than that, it showed that many people only see what they want to see. By becoming Samuel Price, he realized it wasn't enough to look the part. He had to believe it. He adopted a different routine, waking up earlier, drinking coffee from a plain mug, avoiding any sign of luxury. This immersion helped him step into the character naturally without the risk of being exposed. The more convincing he was, the more authentic people's reactions around him would be. The plan was risky, but Jonathan was willing to embrace every detail. He knew he might face humiliation, prejudice, and indifference. Even so, he was ready, because he believed the truth only revealed itself when stripped of status and power. In his mind, one certainty echoed. This journey could change not only how he saw others, but also how he saw himself. He had already decided in which sectors of the company Samuel Price would begin to work. Places where executives rarely cared to look, areas where the most humble employees endured the greatest difficulties. It was there that masks would fall, there that the true tests of character would emerge. Jonathan knew, genuine respect does not arise in boardrooms but in the small gestures of everyday life. And so, with each piece of the disguise in place, Jonathan took the first step toward living as Samuel. It was the beginning of a transformative experience, a plunge into the essence of humanity. He left behind the billionaire to wear the skin of the invisible, the anonymous, the overlooked. Yet he had no idea of the weight of the discoveries awaiting him once he became unseen within his own empire. Samuel Price, the new janitor, began walking through the company's corridors as if he were part of the furniture. No one paid attention to his slow steps or the squeak of the bucket he pushed. Those who once smiled at Jonathan Reed now averted, their eyes ignoring the presence of the man who kept the place clean. The invisibility was so dense it felt like a cloak wrapped around him entirely, and it did not take long for indifference to turn into contempt. Executives walked past him without so much as a greeting, some even pushing his cleaning cart aside, to pass without asking permission. Whispered remarks followed, muffled laughter, comments about his skin color, about his condition, as if he were inferior. Jonathan, behind the disguise, felt firsthand what many of his employees silently endured every day. The experience of invisibility revealed cruel truths. The same man who, hours earlier, was flattered for his position of power was now treated as disposable. It became clear how people often fail to see the human being, seeing only the title, the bank account, the position displayed. It was as though his dignity was tied directly to the uniform he wore, not the character he carried within. Among them all, Thomas Grant, his chief executive, was the one who most clearly dropped the mask. In the role of loyal right hand, he always spoke words of devotion and promises of fidelity. But before the janitor, his true nature emerged: arrogance, sarcasm, indifference. He looked at Samuel as one might look at something worthless, disposable. This contrast cut Jonathan deeply, to witness hypocrisy so closely. In the hallways, some mocked openly. Racist remarks were thrown around casually, as if they carried no consequence. Some laughed at his scruffy beard, others made jokes about his age. The complicit silence of the rest was as sharp as the direct insults. Jonathan realized that the company he had built was stained with prejudice, hidden under ties and polite smiles. The most surprising thing was how easily people could be cruel. Merely seeing him in a worn uniform was enough to judge him as incapable, unworthy, or inferior. This reality exposed a painful social truth: the tendency to devalue those who hold simple yet essential jobs. After all, those who keep the hallways clean rarely receive applause, yet are indispensable for others to shine. Each look of contempt was a lesson. Jonathan began to understand that power blinds, and that many in positions of prominence had never experienced the weight of exclusion. Now, living as Samuel, he felt each word pierce like an arrow. More than a test, it became a learning experience. It was not just about discovering who was loyal, but about seeing the invisible pain within his own company. The contrast between his real life and Samuel's life was so stark it bordered on surreal. Yesterday, he was the billionaire applauded at a gala dinner. Today, he was the forgotten man in the corner of a hallway. This shock revealed that true respect cannot depend on status. The same human being, with the same essence, was either admired or despised based solely on how he appeared. And as the days passed, Jonathan realized his experience was only beginning. The whispers, the jokes, the uncomfortable silence whenever he entered a room, all of it added up like a growing weight. Deep down, he knew, harsher moments were still to come, humiliations that would test how much he could endure. The stage was set for even more bitter revelations. The day of the meeting seemed like any other, but for Samuel Price it would be different. While the executives gathered around an imposing wooden table, he entered discreetly, carrying a broom and a bucket of water. His only goal was to clean the room, but for the others, his presence was nothing more than a nuisance. At that moment, the silence of the room was broken by muffled laughter. Thomas Grant was the first to notice. With a look heavy with superiority, he commented loudly as if Samuel were incapable of hearing. "Look at that, even the hallways now have cheap entertainment." The phrase drew loud laughter from those present. The supposed right-hand man of Jonathan Reed, once a symbol of loyalty, was now exposing his true face: arrogance disguised as cruel humor. The humiliation became a spectacle. One of the executives pointed at Samuel's worn uniform and made jokes about second-hand fashion. Another mimicked his hunched steps, sparking more laughter. In seconds, the room was transformed into a stage of cruelty, where the weakest was ridiculed without hesitation. The casual nature of the insults revealed the deep lack of empathy ruling that environment. Samuel kept his eyes down as if absorbing every word without reacting. But behind the old glasses, Jonathan Reed was watching carefully, recording every gesture, every laugh. He was not seeing jokes aimed at a janitor. He was seeing proof that many within his company had no respect for human dignity. What to them was a joke, to him was the bitterest of truths. The mockery did not stop at his uniform or appearance. Some whispered comments about the color of his skin, as if it justified treating him as inferior. That detail cut Jonathan like a blade, for it showed that prejudice, though hidden, was entrenched in the very heart of his leadership team. This was more than personal humiliation. It was a portrait of reality lived by countless invisible people. In the corner of the room, a few remained silent, uncomfortable, yet none dared to interrupt the scene, as if fear of losing status outweighed the courage to defend what was right. Jonathan realized that complicit silence is also a form of violence. Often, it is not only the aggressors who wound, but also those who remain silent in the face of injustice. As he swept the floor, feigning normalcy, Jonathan felt the weight of the experience. Every laugh echoed like proof that his empire had strayed from the values he thought he had built. There, before everyone, lay the answer he had been seeking. The respect he received as a billionaire was not genuine. It was bought, conditioned, by the power he held. And when that power was stripped away, all that remained was contempt. Thomas, fueled by the laughter of his colleagues, pushed further. In a harsh tone, he said, "If you're going to get in the way again, ask permission. This is no place for someone who only knows how to push a broom." The words reverberated like a sentence. For a moment, the entire room fell silent, not out of shame, but out of the intensity of the insult. The commanding tone, dripping with prejudice, turned that moment into a true public execution of respect. And even in the face of pain, Jonathan held on to his disguise. He did not respond, did not react, did not break character. He simply kept sweeping, as if he were invisible. But inside, something began to shift. The flame of indignation grew, and with it, the certainty that when the revelation came, it would be even more powerful. What he had discovered so far was only the beginning. Among all the indifferent looks Samuel Price received, there was one that stood out, that of Olivia Harris, the receptionist. While others treated him as invisible, she greeted him with a simple yet sincere smile. That small difference carried the weight of a transformative gesture. For Jonathan Reed, hidden behind the disguise, it was as if someone finally saw him beyond the worn uniform and scruffy beard. Olivia had a light-hearted way of dealing with people. She always offered a cheerful good morning regardless of who stood before her. One day she noticed Samuel looked tired and brought him an extra cup of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said naturally. That gesture, almost insignificant, to many felt like a breath of humanity within the cold corporate environment. Her kindness wasn't limited to kind words. There were days when she shared her lunch with Samuel, without hesitation. "I made too much food, better to not waste it," she said with a smile. To Jonathan, this was more than sharing a meal. It was proof that genuine care doesn't look at status but sees another's need. It was in those small details that true respect flourished. What was remarkable was how Olivia did everything without expecting anything in return. There were no hidden motives, no calculations of interest. She treated Samuel the same way she would treat anyone else, with attention and humanity. This behavior stood in stark contrast to the cynicism of the executives, who only acted based on advantage. Jonathan saw in the receptionist a reflection of values he thought had been forgotten. Over time, Olivia began initiating small conversations. She asked how he was, commented on the weather, or told some funny story from the day. Samuel replied simply, keeping the role of janitor. But inside, Jonathan absorbed each moment as a lesson. He realized that true greatness lies in noticing those whom no one else bothers to see. These interactions grew into something meaningful. In an environment where he was the target of jokes and prejudice, Olivia became the balance point. Her generosity was like a lighthouse in the darkness. For Jonathan, each smile of hers seemed a reminder that even within the coldest structures, there is always room for humanity. It was a balm in his journey of invisibility. Her impact went beyond the moment. At the end of the day, as he walked home in disguise, Jonathan reflected on Olivia's gestures. He remembered his mother, who always said that true kindness is silent and doesn't need applause, and that was exactly what he found in the receptionist. Authenticity in every detail, without expectation of recognition. Without realizing it, Olivia was beginning to earn the trust of the man behind the disguise, not through grand acts, but through the consistency of small gestures. Jonathan saw that if someone could recognize value in Samuel, the janitor, then perhaps she was one of the few capable of respecting Jonathan, the billionaire. That discovery planted a seed of hope in his heart. And so, while contempt grew in the corridors, kindness quietly blossomed in Olivia's smile. Jonathan knew he was witnessing something rare, and that this simple connection might change not only how he viewed others, but also how he viewed himself. The stage was set, and this spark of humanity would prove essential for what was to come. The conversations between Samuel Price and Olivia Harris, which began with simple gestures of kindness, gradually grew into something deeper. What once was just a cup of coffee offered with sincerity became long exchanges of words at the end of the workday. Jonathan Reed's disguise remained intact, but inside him grew the sensation of being truly seen for the first time without the barrier of power and wealth. Olivia spoke about her life with ease, without masks. She told stories of her childhood, the dreams she still nurtured, and even the struggles she faced. Samuel listened attentively, absorbing every detail. For Jonathan, it was an unprecedented experience, someone opening up to him without interest in his last name or the fortune attached to it. It was like drinking pure water after years of adulterated wine. Casual meetings began extending beyond the company walls. A quick lunch, a walk in the park, a coffee at a quiet corner cafe in the city. Olivia saw Samuel as a simple, hard-working man with no luxuries or spotlights. Jonathan discovered day after day that the true charm lay in this freedom, not needing to prove anything, only to exist. Olivia laughed easily, and that captivated Samuel. She didn't worry about appearances. She valued the present, and she had a way of turning ordinary moments into something special. Jonathan realized that while many sought to get close to him to gain favors, Olivia drew near simply because she wanted to. And for him, that was the greatest revelation of all. There was something magical about being accepted for who he seemed to be, not for what he possessed. The invisible janitor was finding space in the receptionist's heart, and the billionaire hidden within him experienced an unknown peace. Jonathan began to see that true love is born of simplicity, when the eyes perceive the soul rather than the labels. With each meeting, their bond grew stronger. There were no lavish dinners, no expensive gifts, only the sincere exchange of words and presence. Olivia admired Samuel's humility, unaware that this man carried more secrets than she could imagine. Jonathan, in turn, discovered that perhaps it was possible to live a life different from the one the world expected of him. This secret love also carried a trace of fear. Jonathan knew that sooner or later the truth would come to light. But for now, he allowed himself to live in the moment. For the first time in a long time, he was not the untouchable billionaire in a glass tower, but a common man discovering the beauty of being loved without figures or contracts. Their nightly walks revealed this contrast. While Olivia spoke of simple dreams, such as traveling to see new places, Samuel reflected silently. He had the power to turn any of those dreams into reality, yet he chose only to listen, never revealing what he could provide. The secret kept him divided between guilt and the sweetness of being, for the first time, just Jonathan. And so, love blossomed quietly, kept in discreet corners of the city, and in the glances they exchanged amid the company's routine. Olivia believed she was getting to know a humble janitor, while Jonathan discovered the chance to rewrite his own story. Destiny, however, was already preparing the next act, and in it, the truth would carry the weight of an undeniable revelation. The most important meeting of the quarter gathered all the executives around the large, dark wooden table. Samuel Price entered quietly, carrying his cleaning bucket. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone focused on numbers, strategies, and projections. No one noticed him until the metallic clang of the bucket struck the leg of the table. The sound echoed like thunder in the silent room. The accident seemed insignificant, but for Thomas Grant, it was the perfect opportunity. He rose abruptly, his face red with rage, and pointed at Samuel. "Useless, you can't even clean properly," he shouted, forcing everyone to turn toward the janitor. The weight of the words crashed down on Jonathan like stones, not because of the insult itself, but because it exposed a prejudice that was usually hidden behind closed doors. The room, once concentrated on graphs and reports, became a stage for humiliation. Thomas did not stop. "That's why people like you are only good for pushing brooms. Don't get in the way of those doing real work," he continued, his voice sharp and dripping with contempt. The gazes of the other executives ranged from complicit laughter to cowardly silence. The spectacle of cruelty was complete. Samuel stood, still, gripping the broom handle tightly. His hunched posture concealed the storm boiling inside Jonathan. He saw before him the embodiment of all his fears, the absolute lack of respect for human dignity. That scene was not just against him, but against all those who lived invisible lives every day. His experience as a janitor was reaching its peak of pain. It was then that Olivia Harris entered the room carrying a tray of coffee for the executives. The shock was immediate. She witnessed every word, every insult, every hidden laugh. Her eyes, which always carried kindness, now reflected outrage. The tray trembled in her hands, and one of the cups nearly spilled onto the polished floor. Thomas, consumed by fury, did not notice Olivia's presence. He continued his insults, hurling phrases laden with prejudice that sliced through the air like blades. To him, Samuel was nothing but an easy target. To Olivia, however, the scene was revealing. For the first time, she saw how her company treated the invisible, the very people who sustained the routine without ever being acknowledged. Samuel's silence in the midst of the storm only heightened the contrast. While he was attacked, he remained steady, offering no words in return. This self-control made the moment even more powerful. Jonathan knew that soon it would not be Samuel standing there, but the truth itself, ready to emerge. The moment demanded endurance because the revelation would carry even greater weight after such cruelty. Olivia, unable to contain herself, let out a soft but firm "enough." The word was strong enough to halt some of the laughter. The tray shook in her hands and one cup crashed to the floor, spilling coffee across the carpet. The tension grew heavier, as though the entire room were suspended between humiliation and something greater that was about to happen. And in that instant, Jonathan realized the climax had arrived. The mask of Samuel was hanging by a thread, and the truth pulsed within him, ready to be revealed. What had been a game of observation was now a battle for dignity. The next act would not simply be a response, but a revelation powerful enough to change the fate of everyone in that room. The silence after Thomas's outburst seemed to swallow the entire room. Samuel Price remained motionless, gripping the broom handle tightly, while every gaze turned toward him. Olivia Harris, still standing at the door, was breathless after witnessing the scene. The tension was almost tangible, as if something was about to break. And then Jonathan Reed made the decision that would change everything. Calmly, he set the broom on the floor. His fingers reached for his face, firmly pulling away the fake beard. Next, the old glasses slid through his hand and the poorly aligned wig was placed aside. Before the stunned executives, the imposing figure of Jonathan Reed, the billionaire, they all swore they respected, emerged. Shock painted every face, as though the impossible had just happened. Thomas Grant's breath faltered for an instant. His arrogance wavered, but he still tried to recover. "Mr. Reed, I didn't know," he stammered, searching for an escape that did not exist. Jonathan, however, did not need to raise his voice. A single firm look, heavy with disappointment, was enough to reduce the executive who once bragged so much to utter insignificance. The weight of the moment was not only in the revelation of his identity. Jonathan revealed himself not merely as the owner of the company, but as someone who had felt contempt and indifference firsthand. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was calm yet grave. "You did not insult me as your boss, Thomas. You revealed who you truly are as a human being." The silence of the other executives was deafening. Some lowered their heads, others shifted their gaze, unable to face the man now showing them the reflection of their own actions. Jonathan seized the pause to drive each word like a sentence. "True greatness is not measured by the position we hold, but by how we treat those who have nothing to offer in return." At that moment, Olivia dropped the tray, scattering cups across the floor. The sharp sound echoed in the room, breaking the collective stillness. Her eyes met Jonathan's, and she seemed disoriented. Everything she had shared with Samuel was now in question. The words slipped from her lips, filled with pain. Who are you? Why did you deceive me all this time? The hurt in her voice cut deeper than any insult. Jonathan took a step toward her, but she backed away, refusing his closeness. Her expression carried a mixture of shock, confusion, and sorrow. The man she believed to be simple and sincere now revealed himself as someone who had hidden not only his identity, but the truth of his entire life. Olivia hurried out of the room, leaving behind an even greater void. Jonathan remained still, watching her figure disappear down the hallway. The pain of her departure was, for him, even stronger than the humiliation he had endured moments before. The billionaire, who seemed to have everything, now discovered the weight of losing what he most desired, the trust of someone who had seen him only as a human being. And as silence returned to the room, Jonathan Reed knew the revelation was not yet over. The next step would not simply be to punish Thomas Grant or scold the others. The true challenge would be to rebuild the company upon new foundations, while somehow seeking to win back Olivia's heart. The game of appearances had ended. Now began the battle for truth. The revelation had left deep scars on the company. Jonathan Reed, now without disguises, gathered the employees and announced a new era. He spoke of equality, respect, and the need to rebuild the organizational culture. It was not just about goals or profits, but about values. That moment marked the beginning of a transformation no one could ignore. Among the measures, Jonathan announced new policies for workplace conduct. He created reporting channels, mandatory training on respect and diversity, and open space to hear from the humblest employees. For the first time, janitors, receptionists, and interns were invited to discussion tables. The message was clear. Dignity is not a privilege, it is a right, and those unwilling to respect it would no longer have a place there. Despite the changes, there was one absence that haunted him: Olivia Harris. She had avoided Jonathan since the day of the revelation. Her presence, once welcoming, had turned into distant silence. For him, each missed encounter was like an open wound. The man who once held the world in his hands now felt the weight of not having the one who mattered most. The following Friday, Olivia received an unexpected invitation. She was to go to the president's office. She walked through the hallways with firm steps, though her heart raced. She found Jonathan waiting for her, not with the arrogant posture of a billionaire, but with the vulnerable gaze of a man willing to strip away every armor. The tension between them filled the air. Olivia was direct without hesitation. "Why did you deceive me?" she asked, her voice firm though her eyes were filled with tears. Jonathan took a deep breath, knowing no excuse would ever be enough. Still, he chose the truth. "Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me without money, without power, and that someone was you." The words echoed like a confession, not an excuse. The silence that followed was stronger than any speech. Olivia studied him, trying to decipher whether there was sincerity in every syllable. Jonathan, in turn, did not try to persuade her with promises or explanations. He simply let his vulnerability speak. For the first time, he was not appearing as an entrepreneur, but as a man, imperfect, flawed, and human. Her anger was still there, but mixed with an emotion Olivia did not want to admit. She remembered the conversations, the laughter, the small gestures. All of it had been real, even if his identity was not. This duality tormented her, to hate the lie or to recognize the truth behind the disguise. The doubt was written across her face. Jonathan did not ask for forgiveness right away, because he knew forgiveness is not demanded, it is earned. He simply said, "I understand if you cannot forgive me, but I needed you to know what you truly meant to me." Those words left Olivia speechless. The weight of his honesty placed her before a choice that would change not only the two of them, but their entire future. And in that instant, the confrontation stopped being about the lie and became about something greater: the possibility of love and redemption. Olivia took a deep breath, turned her gaze away for a moment, and felt her heart race. Jonathan waited, in silence, for the decision that would define the course of their story. The next step was in her hands. The silence between Jonathan Reed and Olivia Harris felt eternal. But when he reached out his hand and let the words flow with sincerity, something shifted in her gaze. Anger gave way to vulnerability, and the pain mingled with the affection that had never truly left. The weight of the lie was still there, but love began to speak louder. In a moment that seemed suspended in time, Olivia stepped closer. Her tearful eyes met his, and the barrier of mistrust shattered. Jonathan, with a courage only truth can bring, embraced her. The kiss that followed was not only of passion, but of reconciliation. It was the promise that from that day forward, there would be no more masks. With their hands still entwined, Jonathan pulled a ring from his pocket. It was not extravagant, but it carried meaning, a symbol of true commitment. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice firm yet emotional. Olivia took a deep breath, hesitated for a second, but the answer escaped as a whisper. Yes. Hope was reborn. The following week, the entire company was stunned. During a general meeting, Jonathan introduced Olivia as his fiancée. The shock was immediate. The humble receptionist now stood in a place of honor beside the billionaire. But more than surprise, the moment inspired admiration. It was proof that respect and true love do not bow to status. Under his new leadership, Jonathan established clear rules. Respect would no longer be optional, but the foundation of the company's culture. Policies of equity, employee recognition programs, and open forums for dialogue were implemented. The transformation was not only in documents, but in the spirit of the organization. He wanted everyone to feel what he had learned as Samuel Price. Olivia, now by his side, became more than a life partner. She became a source of inspiration. Her kindness was recalled in every meeting, her courage cited as an example. The couple symbolized a new era, where dignity was paramount, and love proved to be the greatest force of transformation. Together, they rewrote the company's story. Jonathan realized that wealth without purpose is only a burden. His true legacy would be leaving behind an environment where everyone, from executive to janitor, was treated with equal importance. He remembered the scornful looks, the cruel laughter, and used those memories as fuel to ensure they would never happen again. The empire now had a soul. From his office on the top floor, Jonathan and Olivia looked out at the city glowing in the night. They saw not just buildings and lights, but a future they could build together. He looked at her as one who finds safe harbor after a long storm. She looked at him as one who discovers that simplicity can transform even the tallest skyscraper, and so the man who once hid behind a worn-out uniform had now found his greatest wealth: true love and justice. The disguise had fallen, but it had revealed far more than an identity. It had revealed the chance to begin again, to live a life guided by purpose, and this was only the beginning of a new era. In the end, the lesson is simple. The world reveals who we truly are when no one is watching. Jonathan Reed learned this in the most painful way, by being treated as invisible. And you? Are you surrounded by people who respect you for who you are, or only for what you have? The question may hurt, but the answer could change your life. If you want to stop living in illusions and start seeing the truth about people and about yourself, this is the moment to act. So don't waste time. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications, because here you'll find stories that don't just inspire but challenge, provoke, and make you rethink everything you thought you knew.